In 2010, Europe gave Greece the largest bailout in history, 320 billion euros, more money than most countries will ever see. It was supposed to save Greece. Instead, it destroyed it. Unemployment doubled, wages collapsed, a quarter of the economy vanished. And 15 years later, Greece is still drowning in debt, deeper than before the rescue began. This isn't a story about a bailout. It's a story about a trap, because the money didn't go to Greece, it went through Greece. To German banks, to French banks, to creditors who made bad bets and needed to be made whole. The Greeks got the bill. Europe called it a rescue. Welcome to the autopsy of Greece's economy. Every collapse has a cause of death. This one has a name, the euro. To understand Greece's euro story, you need to understand Greece before the euro. Through the 1980s and 90s, Greece wasn't a modern European economy. The drachma, its own currency, was weak. The government borrowed regularly. Inflation often hit double digits. But here's the thing, Greece could handle it. When crisis came, and it came often, Greece would devalue the drachma, the currency would get cheaper, exports would revive, tourism would boom, debts would become manageable.
Was it painful?
Yes.
Was it brutal?
Absolutely.
But it worked.
Greece would always pick itself up and keep going. Then something changed in the late 1990s. Europe was creating a single currency, the euro. 12 countries would abandon their currencies and join a common system. Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and Greece. For Greece, this was a massive opportunity. Joining the euro meant wealth, it meant stability, it meant being part of Europe's rich club, using the same money as Frankfurt and Paris, borrowing at German interest rates. And most importantly, no more devaluations, no more drachma crashes. Just the strong, stable, respectable euro. But there was a problem. To join the euro, you had to meet criteria. Your debt to GDP ratio had to be below 60%. Your budget deficit had to be below 3% of GDP. Your inflation had to be under control. Greece met none of them. So what did it do? It cheated. In the late 1990s, the Greek government went to Wall Street, specifically to Goldman Sachs, and Goldman offered them a solution: currency swaps. Complex financial instruments that could make Greece's borrowing look like something else. The numbers would look good. Europe would be happy. Goldman Sachs charged 300 million euros for the service, and it worked. In 2001, Greece was admitted to the eurozone. Greeks celebrated, European politicians gave congratulatory speeches. Everyone talked about the euro's success. But everyone knew the truth. German bankers knew. French financiers knew. The European Central Bank knew. Greece's real debt was more than double what it claimed. Its deficit was far above the limits. The numbers were fake. Nobody cared. Because everyone was making money. German and French banks were lending to the Greek government at low rates, now backed by the euro, so it seemed safe. Greek politicians were spending new highways, Olympics, public salaries to keep voters happy. Everyone was winning. The euro was a party built on the edge of a cliff, and everyone was having such a good time. Nobody looked down. Through the 2000s, Greece boomed. The economy grew. Jobs appeared. Greeks were borrowing at the same rates as the rest of Europe. Living standards rose. But so did the debt. The Greek government was spending more than it took in. Every year, the budget deficit was growing, debt was mounting. But nobody worried because borrowing was cheap and the economy was growing. Then 2008 came. The 2008 global financial crisis didn't hit Greece directly. Greek banks hadn't invested in subprime mortgages. Greece wasn't exposed to Lehman Brothers' collapse. But the crisis did one thing. It forced everyone to look at the numbers. And Greece's numbers were catastrophic. In the fall of 2009, a newly elected government revealed the truth. The previous government had been lying. The budget deficit wasn't 3% of GDP, it was 13%, maybe more. Debt was 115% of GDP, and climbing fast. Markets panicked. The banks that had lent to Greece suddenly realized Greece can never pay this back. The country was on the brink of default. Greek bond yields exploded. From 5% to 10%, then 15%, then 20%. The cost of borrowing became impossible. Greece couldn't find money in the markets. By March 2010, Greece faced a choice. It could default, refuse to pay its debts, devalue its currency, rebuild the economy from scratch. It would be painful. It would be brutal. But it would work. Argentina did it. Iceland did it. It was a playbook used for decades. But Greece couldn't, because Greece didn't have its own currency. It had the euro. And you can't devalue the euro because it's not yours. Greece was locked in a cage. Europe, especially Germany and France, had to make a decision. They could kick Greece out of the eurozone, let it default. Then their own banks exposed to Greek debt would take massive losses, or they could lend Greece money, a bailout package. Europe chose the second option. In May 2010, the European Union and International Monetary Fund announced the first bailout, 110 billion euros. Greece was given conditions. They called it the Memorandum: austerity, cut government spending, raise taxes, shrink the public sector, restructure the economy. Greece accepted. It had no choice. And here's where the trap was set. Because the bailout money didn't go to the Greeks. Here's what actually happened. Greece was given 110 billion euros, but the Greek government never saw it. The money went directly to the banks that had lent to Greece. German banks, French banks, Greek banks, creditors who'd made bad bets. The debts were paid. The banks were made whole. The losses were covered. The Greeks got the bill, a debt load 3 times larger, and now they owed it to Europe. They called it a bailout. But it wasn't rescuing Greece, it was protecting Europe from Greece, and protecting European banks from their bad loans. Greece wasn't saved. It became a transfer station. The first bailout didn't fix the economy. It made it worse. Greece was implementing austerity. As ordered by Europe, the Troika, they called it the European Central Bank, the European Commission, and the IMF. Government spending was cut. Public workers were fired. Taxes went up. Wages went down. Pensions were slashed. And the economy collapsed. Austerity was supposed to work in theory. You cut spending, you balance the budget, confidence returns, the economy grows. But in Greece, the opposite happened. When spending dropped, demand fell. Businesses closed. Greeks lost their jobs. Tax revenue dropped even more. The deficit didn't close, it grew. The Troika demanded more cuts, more taxes, more austerity. Greece complied. It had no choice. It needed the bailout money. The second bailout came in 2012. Another 130 billion euros, more conditions, more surveillance. The Troika was now approving the Greek budget, approving Greek laws. Sovereignty was an illusion. Decisions were made in Brussels, Frankfurt, Washington, not Athens. Greece wasn't governing itself anymore. Its creditors were. And the economy kept falling. In 2010, unemployment was around 12%. By 2013, it hit 27%. 1 in 4 Greeks had no job. For young people, it was even worse. Youth unemployment exceeded 60%. More than half couldn't find work. So what did they do? They left. Doctors went to Germany. Engineers moved to Australia. Teachers fled to the UK. Greece's brightest, most educated generation packed their bags and left. Between 2008 and 2018, over 500,000 Greeks left the country. It wasn't brain drain, it was brain flight. An entire generation gone. The ones who stayed struggled to survive. The middle class was destroyed. People who'd spent their lives saving, buying homes, planning for retirement, lost everything overnight. Pensions were cut in half. Salaries dropped 40%. In real terms, people were being paid in a currency they couldn't afford to spend. Poverty soared. Child malnutrition spiked. Suicides increased. And Greece's debt? It didn't shrink. It grew. In 2010, Greece's debt was 115% of GDP. By 2015, it hit 180%. Despite the massive bailouts, despite the brutal austerity, because the bailout money never went to the actual Greek economy. It went to banks. It went to pay old debts. It went to create new debt. As the economy shrank, of course the debt-to-GDP ratio climbed. Greece was in a trap. The more it complied, the deeper it sank, and the Greeks were fed up. In early 2015, the Greeks made a choice. After years of austerity, rising debt, collapsing economy, they wanted change. A radical left-wing party called Syriza came to power. Their leader Alexis Tsipras promised to end austerity and renegotiate with Europe. Enough is enough, he said. Greece's dignity would return. The Greeks believed him. Through May, Tsipras negotiated with Europe. The Troika wanted new terms. More cuts, more austerity. Same deal. Tsipras refused. By June, Greece ran out of money. Banks closed. ATMs were limited to 60 euros per day. The economy froze. The Troika offered a deal. Pension cuts, tax increases, more austerity. Final offer, they said. Tsipras called a referendum. On July 5, 2015, the Greeks voted. The question was simple: accept Europe's terms or reject them. 61% voted no. We've had enough cuts. We've suffered enough. We're done being told what to do by Brussels and Berlin. The government that called the referendum promised to respect the result. Prime Minister Tsipras stood before cheering crowds and said, "Democracy has spoken." 1 week later, he signed the exact deal the people rejected. Every cut, every condition, everything. In that moment, Greek democracy died. Tsipras's explanation was this: we had no choice. The Troika threatened expulsion from the euro. Greek banks would collapse. The economy would be completely destroyed. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was bluffing. We'll never know. But what we do know is this: the Greeks voted. The government ignored them. Europe didn't care. And that's when Greece learned: when your currency isn't yours, your country isn't yours. The third bailout came in 2015. Another 86 billion euros. More conditions, more surveillance, more austerity. Total over 320 billion euros. 3 bailouts, 15 years, and Greece is still sinking. Today in 2025, Greece is still in crisis. Debt is still over 160% of GDP. Youth unemployment is still over 30%, Europe's highest. Wages are still 20% lower than 2008 in real terms. Recovery means tourism revenue. The actual economy is still dead. The brain drain continues. Millions of Greeks still live abroad, sending money home to keep their families alive. Has Greece recovered? No, it survived. The difference is enormous. What is Greece now? A theme park, a museum, a beautiful corpse that Europe keeps alive, just alive enough to keep serving drinks to tourists. Every summer, millions of tourists flock to Greece. The beaches, the islands, the ancient ruins, the perfect Mediterranean sunshine. They spend their money, they take their photos, they go home with memories of paradise. But the Greeks serving them while they sip ouzo and watch the sunset over Santorini are working 3 jobs and still can't pay rent. This is the country that invented democracy, that gave the world philosophy, mathematics, theater, that once led Western civilization. Now it serves drinks to German tourists, and the cage is still locked. So how did this happen? How did Greece take the largest bailout in history and end up poorer? The answer is simple. The bailout wasn't for Greece. Over 90% of the money never reached the Greek economy. It went straight to European banks, the ones who'd lent to Greece and didn't want to take losses. The bailout wasn't about saving Greece. It was about protecting Europe from Greece and protecting German and French banks from their bad loans. The Greeks got the debt. The banks got made whole. Europe called it solidarity. But the real crime is this. Europe knew it wouldn't work. The IMF's own report said it. Greece couldn't pay the debt. Austerity would shrink the economy further. Collapse was inevitable. They did it anyway, because the bailout was never about Greece. It was about European banks, giving them time to exit their positions, to offload the losses onto the Greeks. Greece was sacrificed, and they called it a rescue. So what's the cause of death? Patient, Greek economy. Cause of death, loss of monetary control. Primary symptoms, hidden debt, austerity, creditor control, democracy suspended. Terminal event, 2015 referendum ignored. Sovereignty died. Time of death, not dead yet. Still alive, but not living. Being kept alive. Prognosis, permanent crisis. Perpetual stagnation. No exit. The euro is the cage. Greece is the prisoner. Greece's story isn't a rescue story, it's a robbery. Europe threw 320 billion euros. Greece got poorer, banks got richer, and the whole world watched. This is Financial History Autopsy. Every collapse has a cause of death. Next case, Venezuela. How the world's richest country became the world's poorest. Subscribe for more.